Monday Motivation Spotlight. Another inspiring week with an inspiring individual making a difference in Israel. Today, our special guest is Susan Barth, founder and president of Together in Happiness, which focuses on marriage education, marriage enrichment for couples at different stages of their life cycle, whether it's engaged couples, whether they're newly married, whether they're going through different transitions in their life, having children or growing up and with children, their family, or when it comes to empty nesters and retirees. They focus on all the different ages. They run events, they have resources, they have a great website and a YouTube channel with different information. And Susan stresses that marriage education is not therapy, that it's about preventative information and learning tools and tips and techniques to enhance your marriage and to enrich every step of the way. So Susan shares their journey with us through this podcast, and she also shares a couple of tips that couples can take and use to enrich their marriage. Sit back and enjoy my special conversation with Susan. Susan, welcome to our Monday Motivation Spotlight podcast. I'm so happy to have you as our guest today. We've had a lot of contact over the years, and I've grown to love and be aware of your beautiful nonprofit that you started. So before we get into talking, firstly, a big welcome to you.
Thank you. I am so honored to be here, Lesley. I've been following this entire chain, and it's remarkable how you've kept it going, and we should only never have war again so that you keep going on a good note.
Exactly. Amen. No more wars, and we should continue having motivation and inspiration, B'Zvat Hashem. So before we take our viewers through the journey of Together in Happiness, how it all started, Susan's journey, everyone's journey related to Together in Happiness. So share with us a little bit about Susan growing up in the States, your life growing up there. Were you a Zionist? Were you from a Zionistic family? Were you from a religious family? When did your awareness of Israel actually start that you decided to make Aliyah?
I have to tell you, it is an interesting journey because I'm from Dallas, Texas, and growing up, it was a very homogenous community. Religion, it didn't matter what flavor you were. We were all just Jews. And so I never knew the differences between Litvak or anything until actually coming to Israel. Israel was known as our homeland, but it wasn't the major topic of dialogue. I grew up in a beautiful home, a traditional home. We weren't Shomer Shabbat, but we kept a kosher home. My roots are actually from a Texas roots because I think it was by 1902 that our entire family had left Europe and essentially had settled via Galveston. Originally, my mother was in Oklahoma. She was born in Oklahoma. And by the time she was 4, she was an orphan because her father had died when she was 2. Her mother died when she was 4. My grandfather was a peddler, even to trading with Indians, the native Indians in Oklahoma. You talk about far afield from Israel. And she came with her mother to Dallas, and she was raised by my grandfather's brother and his wife, along with their children. And it was actually thanks to the great uncle that raised my mother. He made the shidduch with my father. And my father, also his roots were in Dallas. There were 10 children and the most loving extended family to grow up in. The fact that we were Jewish, solid foundation, beautiful home to grow up in, which were the basis for my nonprofit. I decided to go away to college. And so I started the trek out of Dallas at college time and went for 2 years to Sophie Harriet Newcomb of Tulane University in New Orleans, which again was not known for its Yiddishkeit. I had also applied to Washington University in St. Louis, and so I transferred because I thought, let me try out the different schools. And from there, I just kept migrating. I went for a graduate school in Washington, D.C., and thought as a sense of irony that, again, I wasn't a practicing Jew at that time, and Israel was not part of my landscape. When I was 18, though, I did go as part of a tour group to Israel.
Where did the fire actually start with Israel and the desire? From that trip, or you went back to the States and only at a later stage?
That set the burner. I knew that Israel was our homeland, and I'd spent enough time there to really get a little spark, but it was very little. And the spark actually didn't really start until I moved from Houston to New York. And the roommates that that I had. Two were Israeli, and one was Debbie Dan. And you will never find a greater Zionist than Debbie Dan. And all of a sudden, I was transported into mini Israel. But even then, it still hadn't hit. I always said, after I got married and my daughter was 7, for some reason I said, at 7 years old, we're going to go to Israel. And how I picked that out, who knows? But all of a sudden she was 7, and it was right before the Gulf War. And I said, oh, this is a perfect time for us to go to Israel. And people go, how crazy can you be? And I called up this national, whatever it is, UJA or something, usually has 4,000 and they're totally booked. But I called them up, and because it was right before the Gulf War, and I said, do you have room? They said, do we have room? Come, we have nobody coming. And I said, yeah, but we don't have passports. Said, we'll take care of it. And they did.
And so your Aliyah journey began.
It began right there. We went on this trip that we stayed at the King David, because again, 2 weeks before the Gulf War, we were welcomed as if we were the king and queen. Forget the fact the residents here had to worry about it. I said, you know what? I could get used to this lifestyle, staying in the King David, making Aliyah, not bad.
As if that is what Aliyah represents, right? Just staying at the King David.
Of course. And so due to a set of Hashkaha Pratis, I was a housing consultant, and I had to keep making trips to Boston because we were living in Hartford. And on one of those trips, I said, let me go into the office. And we had a 10-year plan. How about if we plan for, we'll make Aliyah in 10 years. And we thought that was just a great idea. So that during the course of my professional life and having to continue going to Boston, where they have the Israeli consulate office, on one of the trips there, I said, let me just go in and open the teak. And so that at least we'll have a placeholder for that. So met with Ephraim Zinger, and I was so proud of myself saying, oh, I want to open the teak because in 10 years we're going to make Aliyah. And he said, in typical Israeli style, that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. And why was it stupid? Because he was right. He said, you have a child. She's 8 now. She'll be 18. She won't want to come with you. So what is the point? You need to come in a year. So I went, a year? So I went back to my family, and they, of course, were hardly enthusiastic about this idea of coming in a year, but we did.
It's interesting that you say that, because I know so many people, and the truth is it happened to me as a young couple also with the baby making Aliyah, that we said, you know, we're going to wait until we've saved X amount of money to buy this and to buy that and everything else, and then we'll make Aliyah. It's like putting everything on hold and waiting for this grand moment to make Aliyah. However, what most people don't realize is, I'm not saying one shouldn't plan it and just drop everything and come. Like, obviously a certain amount of planning is important. However, all the years that one spends in the old country waiting for XYZ, whatever it is, actually time lost on the other side, where you could be building your life and developing your life here. So that's an interesting story. So I do want to fast forward a little bit, because we have so much to talk about. I would like to talk about your passion for blogging. And for those of you that do not know, Susan has a wonderful blog on the Times of Israel, where it's very deep. You're very passionate about not only marriage education, marriage enrichment, but also about Judaism. And in most of your blogs, you do link something to do with Judaism. So tell me a little bit about how that whole connection and merging the two things came about, and then we'll move forward in terms of Together in Happiness and some of the activities that you do.
A lot of it is because I'm a very passionate person. And so that among the passions that I have is for Hasidut. And so that in personal development, and because again, I am about Teshuva, and so I didn't really have a deep background. I took time off to study in seminary, and I really took the time to study, to just block out that time of a year and in my midlife. And that sparked the interest. So the combination of that, and why I got into marriage education as a memorial from my parents.
Talk about that, because I love that. We talk about your why, and one's why, about why we start something, whether it's a business or a nonprofit. So that's actually a good point to mention what the basis of starting this whole nonprofit is about.
Thank you for asking. My mother had Alzheimer's for 18 years, and it was a horrible disease that really robbed her of her dignity. But throughout the time of her illness, my father was the main caregiver, and They had 52 years of the most beautiful, supportive marriage. And that I had to really think after she died, I thought this was such a horrible, cruel ending for her life that I wanted to do something in her memory. And Making Aliyah to Beit Shemesh, at that time, couples were getting married. And I looked around for something to memorialize the Hesed community here, Give Out Shirat Hesed committee, that I became involved in. One of the needs was that our community was at the age of people getting married. And so we talked about starting a Simcha Gamak, which still exists to this day. And it was a natural project for my mother, who loved people, loved marriages, loved life, to start the Simcha Gamak in her memory. And so the first product is the wedding guide, and finished the touches for the 8th edition.
Wow, that's incredible. In other words, the whole foundation of Together in Happiness, or as in Hebrew it's called Beyachad B'Osher, started because of your parents' wonderful relationship and the devotion to each other that you wanted to use as a basis that young couples should be inspired to have that same type of relationship, which is beautiful.
Yes, but also I want to mention that the foundation of it was the Simcha Gamak.
Right, it all started with the Simcha Gamach, and then from there grew into everything else. Okay, phenomenal. So share with us over the years, because you've been going now for how many years? Share with our viewers.
2011.
Okay, so that's not a short amount of time. And like with any business or any nonprofit that evolves, I'm sure you've gone through different things, different routes. Share with us some of the really special moments that stand out for you in all this time of running this Amutah or nonprofit Together in Happiness.
I think that the landmark events stand out. It started with a bang of the first International Conference on Marriage Education. 360 people came, which was just like people out of the woodwork. So that after that, our nonprofit started doing workshops. The best workshop that we had was for expecting and new parents, because we had a workshop when they brought their babies. Beautiful young couples were interested enough in helping their own marriages that they would commit the time for a workshop and bring their babies. And it was just one of those moments that you knew that you had a starting point. I had couples that came both when they were engaged and as new parents. So that was one of those beautiful cement moments. And of course, I would say a major highlight was the Knesset seminar for pre-marriage education, because interestingly enough, the curriculum that we were using, there was a non-Jewish partner, and he found out via some means that a legislation was being introduced in Israel. And it was like, how could that be that I didn't know about that? And so I quickly did a search, and MK Glick had actually been, there was legislation, a small legislation that was being on the map. And I jumped in and I said, how can I help? What can I do that can make a difference for this legislation, which was to subsidize marriage education, could actually pass, perhaps. And so, of course, I became their volunteer agent. They went, great. And because they wanted to be able to convince the controller that it would be cost effective. So that I used every chip that I had of all the people in the context of the states, and we produced documents, and a tremendous amount of research went into it to show that it is cost effective. And from that, then it was natural to say, you know what, let's also have the first historical seminar on marriage education in the Knesset. And that was an incredible, because just the fact that you had these MKs that came, the Speaker of the House at that time, and it was just a magical moment of saying, this is a culmination of years in the making that could reach the Knesset. Now, ironically, they put aside 2 million shekalim as a result of the seminar. And the debate, unfortunately, broke down with who would be eligible. It became really almost a political hot potato, and then life took over. But it was one of those moments. And then, of course, the fact that we've had a number of webinars of having different kinds of speakers and on a variety of topics, of trying to blend in things like trauma prevention at the same time, to show that how marriage education, if you actually spend the time giving the tools to couples, it doesn't have to be in one form. It's not like one size fits all. But I think that's really been my passion, is to continuing to explore different avenues for getting the material to the home. Sounds like it's a cliche. Healthy home, healthy family, healthy society, healthy continuum. And that's what we're here for.
Right, absolutely. And I see your passion. We see your passion. For anyone that's visited your YouTube channel, yes, the bit about the Knesset is on there as well, which is phenomenal. Not everyone goes and is able to address the Knesset and to hopefully have impact in that way. But yes, we see from your different webinars and from your different experiences and the range of different speakers that you've had and different things that you've done yourself, how passionate you are about it. And you're very big into research as well. Tell us exactly, when did your whole interest in research start and how you use it to advance Together in Happiness and whatever you're doing?
I'm actually an avid reader and an avid research person. I love pouring into statistics, project management. Peter Drucker has been he was the management guru. And so that in becoming a project management professional, that was my midlife crisis of pouring into a lot of research that it took to actually even qualify for the exam. And then statistics. I've always been fascinated by the Central Bureau of Statistics, how to interpret trends. And so that it was very clear that we needed to do a professional publication. And so I engineered the case for marriage education. And that was really based on the fact that if you can't convince someone on moral grounds, that show them solid research that shows that marriage education works.
You're also very learned and you've done numerous courses on different aspects to enhance your own knowledge, whether you presenting yourself or whether you bringing in a guest speaker. The fact that you are a continual learner and interested in studying new materials and new research, practical stuff as well as research, no doubt influences the direction that the nonprofit takes, as well as your own knowledge.
I'm a college teacher. I'm a certified leader of the Gottman method, of what's called PrEP method as a trained facilitator, and also trauma. I'm a certified life coach. So the idea being that the more knowledge I have to help people's lives, and then I become even more sensitive and empathetic to situations that come up.
Absolutely. Can you think of one or two stories of people that you touched the most over the years through Together in Happiness?
I love the idea of watching couples develop. And this one couple, I met them when they first got engaged, and they reached out because they knew they needed skills. And so I felt like I was their mother, guiding them along the way. To see them grow as couples, starting out as single, because I reached them right at the beginning of their engagement, and to see them now happily married, and we've stayed in touch, it's a gift. Unfortunately, I just watched a program on divorce and out of New York, and they said the divorces in the Orthodox community are skyrocketing now. And so to me, it's such a tragedy. And they actually mentioned that had there been more prevention opportunities, it could have been these situations have gotten, unfortunately, they get to the point that they're at the end. And so watching this couple being part of their first days as a couple and seeing how they navigate, like she mentioned in one of our conversations, that they have a practice before they go to sleep of talking about their day and saying 3 things they like about each other. And it was just
that is so beautiful, especially at the end of the day, that summing up, go to sleep with 3 things that you love about each other.
And then a couple that, again, that I also had when they were engaged and when they had their baby, and the fact that they still wanted to grow. We stayed in touch. I try to give them materials so that when things come up. So it's those kind of personal growth that watching the couples want to get more information so that they don't stop. Also, another couple that started date nights every week as a result of taking the course, and they would tell me about their date nights. So it's those incidences where you feel you're making a difference.
And it's literally one at a time. Baruch Hashem, you've influenced and positively influenced many couples, but it's even just one couple at a time what makes a difference. So I wanted to ask you, I know you talk about a lot that marriage education enrichment is not therapy.
therapy always associated to a degree with the stigma and also with the fact that it represented a broken situation. And when again, going back to exploring different avenues for memorializing my parents and their marriage, I was influenced by, at the time, there was a woman, her name is Diane Soley, and she started Smart Marriages because there was a divorce epidemic at the time. They said therapy just was not working. And so there needed to be an alternative. And she literally, as a therapist herself, said that it's time to explore something preventative and to try to keep it from, if you give enough seeds at the beginning, then you can at least have a chance to, for as each stage develops and there's crisis, you can pull your toolbox out. You know what to do, you know what to anticipate. And that's really what it comes down to, is it's trying to know how to handle each stage, and that's preventative. But unfortunately, as a society, we don't go for preventative. We just go in crisis mode.
In Israel, where so much is happening all the time, is that we always seem to be in crisis mode. Yes, it's been exacerbated over the last couple of years since October 7th, but Israel has always so many, the wonderful Israel that we live in, let me add, always has so many different issues that many times there are other more burning issues, which I assume was also the situation with the Knesset, that people look at the crisis things and what's going on right now rather than the issue of preventative, let's say.
I consider the system. And the system is that just get someone to the chuppah, and the statistics, you just get them to the chuppah because there's a pride. And one of the things that they mentioned in this thing was the degree of mental health issues that were undetected. And that could have been detected had there been some more emphasis on getting couples to realize what is it they're getting into and to know what's really a hardship, what isn't a hardship. And that's where I'm so passionate about getting preventative tools for each stage, not just engage, but each stage that comes along, even retirement. Too many couples.
And to emphasize, I see your target market is couples and women of different ages and different stages, although I know that you have a special spot for the young ones, for the newly marrieds, even though it doesn't necessarily mean that you do more events for newly married, but you have a soft spot for them.
I have a soft spot in the sense that I feel like it's just like, it goes back to my construction. I was a construction lender, and I would go make site visits, and the foundation was the most important. Everybody goes for the window dressing, but I inspected the foundation. And I feel that if you have a solid foundation, at least you're starting out with the best type of bricks that you can lay.
And I'm sure also the fact that many couples, after many years of being married, then when they become empty nesters, things change. The whole dynamics change in a marriage where it's not all about the kids anymore because the kids are now out of the house. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? A couple of words?
Sure. And one of the things that I have started to explore more in terms of research you mentioned is there's something about gray divorce. And gray divorce is that period of time of the empty nesters that has really taken on its own dynamics. And because couples all of a sudden realize that they haven't worked on their relationship and that they don't have the same interests, they don't have the same, like the husband could be around much more than he was before, and that presence causes its own friction. And so that even just cultivating new interests together is just finding the joy of each other's company is something that couples haven't considered.
Share with us one or two tips maybe from some of the courses that you've run that you can just give a little bit of a taste, someone who's looking to give a boost to their marriage.
Active listening is a very interesting concept of really turning and listening to what your partner has to say. And one of the techniques has been called the speaker listener technique, where the speaker takes the floor and speaks about an issue. It could be a good thing, but also primarily could be an issue that you want to talk about. And so the speaker tells about whatever the topic is and then stops, and the listener has to paraphrase exactly what the speaker had to say. And also to start it with the phrases like, so what I hear you saying is, and then checking to the speaker, is that a good paraphrase? Yes, it is. And then you switch roles and back and forth. It's not problem solving. It's called banning problem solving. because people jump too much to problem solving. And so this is meant to be an exchange where at the end of it, many people don't even see that there's a problem because they've had the courtesy to hear the other partner out. And on the other side, another is the timeout. And timeout is really when the conversations are really going so acrimoniously that you realize that if you don't put the brake on the conversation before it goes downhill, it could be very acrimonious. And so in terms of the timeout strategy is for each to stop. Either one is like, whoo, I think it's time we practice that timeout. And you also notice even internally, what's it doing to your own physique to be having this acrimonious exchange, and then to actually name it, come up with a name, like call it the blueberry special or something. Give it a name so that if you say, I think we need a blueberry special, then you know it's a plea for a timeout. But to use the time constructively and not to use during the timeout, to give it a boundary as to when you think you want to come back. The idea is to take a break, but to come back. And so that when you take during the break, it's not to ruminate on how right you were, how justified you were to get your side, but instead to put yourself in the other partner's shoes and say, now I see where I could have handled that a little bit differently. But again, not to make it so that it's withdrawal, that it's a pretense to just leave the percolator of the argument going, but to stop and put a boundary on it if you think it's a couple of hours or something, and to come back and then use that speaker listener technique to say, this is what during the time I had a chance to really think about. You've got a point and I just didn't consider it.
I think that is so important, very important. And I know one other thing that you always mention too is that date nights should be for date nights, for having fun, not using that necessarily as the time to bring out any of the challenges that you're facing. Yes, sometimes couples do use that as the time to actually talk about challenges that they're facing.
Date night is really, a lot of research went into date night. One of the bases, again, what is the most important characteristic of a relationship? It's friendship. Building on the fact that your partner is your best friend. You should be able to talk about anything that you would want to confide in a best friend. But unfortunately, sometimes that friendship gets eroded. And so that the idea of a date night, the studies have shown, you talk about research, that if you plan a date night at least a couple of times a month where you carve out the time, and to the exclusion of phones, exclusion of anybody, and just enjoy, do something that will bring enjoyment, be fun. But it has to be mutual fun, because they said also statistically, if you keep doing the same thing that one partner wants, it's no longer a good date night. So it has to be
something that works for both of you.
And that's why to actually come up with a list of what you would enjoy and to make a card deck, and then to each one take one of the card deck and use that as the basis for the date night.
I love that. Great. And there's a lot more creative ideas also on your YouTube channel. How can people reach you? The best way to reach you, and how can people get involved?
We're on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube. We have our YouTube channel. Through email, marriagecomp@gmail.com.
Your website as well. So just mention your website that people can reach you to.
www.together-in-happiness.com.
How can people get involved if people would like to get involved? I know you're very passionate about advocacy as well as the events that you run. So if you can just mention a sentence about that. And then to end, moving forward, what's on your list, a vision that you see for yourself and for Together in Happiness?
In terms of getting involved, we even welcome new board members, someone that would like to get involved on our board and our webinars. If a person is interested and passionate about marriage education, we have so many different ways of connecting in terms of the media or publications. Love to have more involvement of people's articles, just even if there's something that experiences that people have had in their own suggestions. Love to create a monthly newsletter even that would give tips for people, from parents to grandparents to, we have on our website, we have the different outlets and all the reasons for getting involved. So just go to our website and you'll see each partner is identified in exactly all the normal ways of getting involved.
Wow, fantastic. So much stuff going on. So to end, and we could definitely continue talking for a while, what can we look forward to seeing with Together in Happiness? Where do you, Susan, see Together in Happiness moving? What is your vision?
My vision is we have planned the third International Conference on Marriage Education and Enrichment on December 1st. It's connected to the time of my father's birthday. And it is really mentioned for both sides of the ocean. It's really intended as an opportunity for us to bond together. And when I say bond, I mean, I'm talking about all the different players that are involved in marriage. That's who we want to attract to this conference. The idea is a gathering. And we're talking about from the rabbis, we're talking about the couples, the middle-aged couples that we talked about, and the mental health community, the social media community. Anyone who marriage touches, that's who we want you to come. And it's going to be at the Nefesh B'Nefesh Center. Save the date, because I am so excited about the ability to just explode the topic, and so that it does become the cultural norm.
Wow, phenomenal. Okay, so December the 1st at Nefesh B'Nefesh in Jerusalem. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about it. So for our viewers, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Monday Motivation Spotlight. I've had a fantastic time speaking to Susan Barth of Together in Happiness. I'm Lesley Kaplan. Thank you to our sponsors, to Egan & Co Insurance, as well as to Lali's Flower Boutique in Jerusalem. And we will see you next week on the Monday Motivation Spotlight. Bye-bye.